we'll be heading to Cairo, today the capital of Egypt, for number 10 in my countdown top 10 treasures. Meet Ramses III. Ramses was a man with lots of enemies. He had to fight off invading armies from the Middle East to defend Egypt. But the real trouble came from within the kingdom. His wife, Queen Tiye, wanted her son on the throne, so she hatched a plot to assassinate her husband. Now we know all about this because it's recorded on a papyrus that's now in Turin, and this historical event is known as the Harem Conspiracy. We're told that the plot failed. The conspirators were arrested and were sentenced to death. But what happened to Ramses? Is there any evidence on this mummy that tells us exactly what happened to Ramses?
Yes, after made a CT scan around his neck, we found bandages, as you can see here, and we didn't know why that bandages is a little bit thick than the other bandages. And after made a CT scan, we found that he had been assassinated by cutting his throat.
Wow. So that was definitely, so this was a mortal wound, so he couldn't have survived it?
No, he cannot survive because it's big enough to cut the neck and to make the king died within few minutes after the blood expelled out. So this is very amazing. After 3,000 of years, we revealed the secret about which way he had been assassinated.
That's the incredible thing about history, is that it's constantly changing. There are constantly new stories, new chapters being written in.
Without doubt.
And now we're exploring the Nile Delta, where the great River Nile meets the Mediterranean Sea, in search of number 9 in our countdown of great Egyptian treasures. The Rosetta Stone. It was a stone covered in Egyptian hieroglyphs, but that's not all. Underneath, there was what seemed to be a translation in ancient Greek. The experts began by looking at the Greek, which they could still read, and they found the word Ptolemy, which they knew was a pharaoh's name. The challenge was to find the ancient Egyptian equivalent. What they did was they looked in the hieroglyphs to try to find a cartouche. It's a bullet-shaped thing, and inside, that's where the pharaoh's name was always written. This was the very first word they were able to read in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. The first step in deciphering a language that had been dead for 1,500 years. So down here, you've got the name Ptolemy in Greek, and then up here is the name Ptolemy in ancient Egyptian, but this is how they managed to decode it. So what you have is a square that stands for a P, a semicircle for a T, that kind of rope shape is an O, the lion is an L, underneath here you've got an M, and then these two reeds are a Y. So slowly, it meant that they could start to piece together an ancient Egyptian alphabet, and that meant they could suddenly translate ancient Egyptian. And next, we're going to investigate a lost treasure that was plastered in so many hieroglyphs, it took 40 years just to copy them down. When they were finally all translated, they told tales of incest and murder, and at the centre of it all, the family of Egypt's most famous queen, Cleopatra. To get there, we're travelling more than 600 miles up the River Nile to a city in Upper Egypt for treasure number 8. This is our next treasure, the Temple of Edfu. This splendid temple was built by a single royal family, known as the Ptolemies, who ruled Egypt from the 4th century BC until the last and most famous of the whole dynasty, Cleopatra. The entire building tells the story of the great Egyptian queen and her family through the words and pictures carved into the stone walls. This whole gateway was built by Cleopatra's dad, Ptolemy, and you can see Ptolemy there, rather graphically shown slaying his enemies and sacrificing prisoners. But Ptolemy's enemies weren't all outsiders. His own daughter, Cleopatra's older sister, led an armed rebellion against him, which he brutally crushed. He had her killed, leaving little Cleopatra as his heir. With a family like that, you could say that for Cleopatra, this temple wasn't a symbol of royal harmony, but a nest of snakes, as generation after generation of close family members engaged in a deadly game of intrigue, murder, and incest. In fact, out of these 12 ancestors of Cleopatra, every single one was in an incestuous marriage, and at least 7 came to a sticky end. So when Cleopatra herself came to the throne in 51 BC, she inherited a tricky family legacy, to say the least. But also this stunning temple, a family power base. Just outside Egypt's capital, Cairo, is one of the most famous treasures in Egypt. It's our treasure number 7. At number 7 on our list of treasures, it's the Great Sphinx at Giza. The Sphinx crouches at the entrance to one of the busiest tourist sites in the world, the Giza Plateau, famous for its mind-blowingly huge pyramids. But even in this epic setting, the Sphinx is a showstopper. I always find the sheer scale of this incredible creature absolutely jaw-dropping. It was the biggest sculpture made in ancient Egypt, and it's still one of the largest anywhere in the world. But that wasn't obvious when explorers first encountered the Sphinx. The giant statue was buried neck-deep in sand. All they could see poking out was an enormous stone head. But they were mystified. But once they'd cleared the sands, they could appreciate the Sphinx in all its crazy glory. A human head and shoulders on the body of a lion, taller than a 6-story building. The Sphinx was built on such a massive scale because it had an incredibly important job to do. Basically, to be a giant guard dog, carved out of the rock to keep watch over the pharaoh buried in the pyramid behind. All the way beyond Egypt's far-flung southern border, but it's a journey that's worth every moment to reach number 6 in our countdown of top 10 treasures. When you finally get here to Abu Simbel, it is impossible not to be awestruck. This temple was built by Ramses II, probably the greatest of all Egyptian pharaohs. He ruled for an astonishing 66 years, one of the longest reigns in history. And boy, he loved to build. This whole temple is a monument to his reign. And out here, beyond the southern border, he's also giving a powerful warning to the neighbours. There's just one overriding message to this temple. It's saying, I'm in charge, don't mess with me. This is Ramses' ego built in stone, and it has left us with the most awe-inspiring place. The temple walls are covered with ferocious images of the pharaoh defeating his enemies. Number 5 in our countdown. The Step Pyramid is revolutionary, one of the earliest surviving monuments in all of Egypt, and the world's first ever pyramid. 150 years older than the Sphinx and the famous Great Pyramid at Giza. and it's also the world's first stone-cut building. But it's not what's above ground that gets Saqqara onto our list of treasures, but what lies underneath my feet. Because down here, there is a whole subterranean world. And not only that, but here there are thousands, possibly millions, of mummified bodies. This is the final resting place for 16 of Egypt's earliest pharaohs. But it was also a graveyard for queens and nobles and ordinary Egyptians for 3,000 years. So many mummies were buried here that Saqqara became Egypt's biggest city of the dead, stretching over 4 square miles. All these mummies are remarkable enough, but archaeologists have also discovered something else. There aren't just humans hidden here. But animals too, in numbers that beggar belief. 8 million mummified dogs in one mass grave. 4 million ibis birds in another. The necropolis was also home to cats, baboons, crocodiles, fish, and some, well, it's anyone's guess. Next, let's go to one of the most famous places in Egypt, an ancient city on the banks of the Nile, to discover treasure number 4. The Temple of Luxor. For centuries, this was one of Egypt's most splendid temples. But if you're imagining somewhere silent and serious, think again. This was party central. The really brilliant thing about this place isn't just its architectural splendour, but the fact that it would have been absolutely pulsing with life. So here you'd have had priests with their heads and their bodies shaved, and all these columns, you can see some of the traces there, they'd have been absolutely bright with a kind of riot of colour. And then when you came out into the courtyards, there were plates of electrum, which was a mixture of gold and silver that would have reflected back the sun's rays, so it would kind of ricochet out as an extraordinary light show. During festivals, Luxor was the ultimate party venue. All of life was here, indulging in wild, drunken blowouts. Singers, magicians and dancers, like these gorgeous back-flipping acrobats. This time, we're leaving behind the great cities and heading into rocky mountains not far from Luxor for treasure number 3. Today, we simply describe it as the Valley of the Kings. From around 1600 BC, the mummified bodies of pharaohs were brought here to be buried in tombs cut into the steep sides of the valley. Hidden within this rocky terrain are 63 tombs, and they're just the ones we've found so far. They include the tombs of the most famous pharaohs in Egyptian history: Tutankhamun, the boy king; Ramses the Great, builder of Abu Simbel; and our royal assassination victim, Ramses III. Robbers were a key reason Egyptians began to bury their rulers in this remote location. Up until now, pharaohs had been buried in great big pyramids, a bit like the Step Pyramid that we saw at Saqqara. These were fantastic demonstrations of their might and their power, but they were also huge signs saying that treasure was buried there, so they were incredibly tempting for robbers and raiders. And that's why the ancient Egyptians began to bury their kings far from prying eyes in this valley. So remote, they hoped it would keep them and their tombs safe forever. But there is one treasure that was always going to be, as near as damn it, the top of the list. We're staying right here in the Valley of the Kings for treasure number 2. When this tomb was first opened in 1922 by the English archaeologist Howard Carter, very few had heard of the pharaoh whose body lay inside. But he was soon to become a household name, Tutankhamun. And that was because, unlike the other tombs in the valley, this tomb's treasures had been kept safe from thieves. And what fabulous treasures they are. This is one of 3 spectacular gold coffins found here, each lying inside the other like Russian dolls. The outer 2 were made of wood covered in gold, but the inner one was solid gold, weighing 100 kilos. Today, that gold alone would be worth over £3 million.
Getting up this close, you really understand why they used gold to make these amazing coffins. Because the idea was that covered in gold, the gods would realise that these pharaohs, these god men, were actually divine.
And inside the inner gold coffin lay the body of the pharaoh.
So here he is. This is the mummified body of the teenager Tutankhamun.
I really feel for him. He looks so fragile. Mind you, he's the only mummy in the entire valley still in his original tomb, lying all alone in an empty chamber.
But originally, the rooms of this tomb were jam-packed with what Carter described as wonderful things. Pharaohs were buried with hundreds, often thousands, of their precious and personal objects. So things like weapons and beds and jewellery and food and sort of packed lunches. Some of them even took with them their favourite pets who'd been mummified. So it was everything you could possibly need for your journey to the afterlife. Number 1 on our countdown of Egyptian treasures is the Great Pyramid at Giza.
Rising almost 150 metres out of the ground, it remains one of the most gobsmacking constructions in the world.
It took over 20 years to build this pyramid, and it's been estimated that each one of these blocks, which weighs between 1 and 2.5 tons each, would have been put in place every 2 minutes, every day of that 20 years.
The stone was brought from all across Egypt, including granite from more than 500 miles away in the south of the country. The entire Giza Plateau would have been teeming with activity. Over 10,000 workers toiling at the greatest building site the world had ever seen. When the Great Pyramid was finally completed, it was the tallest man-made structure anywhere in the world. A record it held for 4,000 years.
However many times I come here, I find this monument completely mind-blowing. I mean, and if you just think of how that affects me now, today, and I know how it was built, how it would have impacted on the imagination of history across not just centuries, but thousands of years.
And originally, the pyramids would have looked even more imposing. Covered in polished white limestone, it would have blazed out under the desert sun. Much of that casing was actually physically shaken off around 700 years ago, when there was a massive earthquake around here. But you can get a hint of what it would have looked like if you look at the tip of that neighbouring pyramid. So just try to imagine this landscape in its heyday. It would have gleamed out with innovation. It must almost have felt futuristic.
Egypt. Land of ancient pharaohs. Land of infinite deserts. Land of pyramids and millennial mysteries. A gentle breeze lifts grains of golden sand. The Nile flows majestically toward the north. The sun shines relentlessly on ancient temples of stone. Welcome to Egypt. Welcome to the land of the pharaohs. Known as the cradle of civilization, this is a land where time is measured in millennia, where the desert embraces 95% of the territory, and where the river of life creates a green corridor that has nourished empires and dynasties. But let's start from the beginning. Egypt stands as the only country in the world that physically connects Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean. A natural bridge between different worlds, which has made this land a crossroads of cultures, trade, and conquests for over 5,000 years. It is here that the Nile, unique among great rivers and flowing northward, thanks to its continuous floods, has created oases of life in the middle of the planet's vastest desert. Without this sacred river, in fact, Egypt would have remained only sand and stones. Even today, 95% of the population lives within a few miles from its banks, faithful to a millennial pact between man and water. The sun indeed reigns supreme over this land for over 3,800 hours per year, making it one of the brightest countries in the world, but also among the hottest. Despite this extreme climate landscape, Egypt preserves the longest documented cultural continuity in human history. 5,000 years of uninterrupted civilization, which began in 3100 BC and still leaves its visible imprint everywhere today. There are temples, obelisks, and sarcophagi whose creation is lost in the mists of time. Furthermore, the ancient inhabitants of this land created a writing system that remained mysterious for 14 centuries after their disappearance. And we're talking about hieroglyphs, a complex set of symbols that represented sounds, words, and concepts, and could be written in any direction, following the gaze of the figures. Only in 1822, when the Rosetta Stone was deciphered, humanity was able once again to hear the voice of the ancient pharaohs. But perhaps nothing tells better the Egyptian obsession with eternity than the art of mummification. For exactly 70 days, embalmers transform bodies into guardians of time. Immersed in natron, a miraculous salt extracted from desert lakes, the deceased lost 75% of their weight, but gained immortality. Every part of the body was wrapped with linen bandages, which could reach 300 meters, creating masterpieces of preservation that even today, after 3,000 years, maintain intact even the eyelashes. These masters of eternity also invented papyrus, forever revolutionizing the recording of information in the ancient world, and created one of the first 365-day calendars, based on the cycles of the Nile and the stars which have always guided the destiny of this land. Tourism, finally essential as much as fragile, brings millions of visitors to contemplate these wonders, but remains vulnerable to the geopolitical storms of contemporary history, reminding us that even in a land of eternity, the present has its challenges. Egypt, therefore, is much more than a simple nation. It is an entire world, a place where eternity has taken shape in stone and has been preserved. But now let's go to discover the most incredible and iconic places of this nation. Cairo. Welcome to the mother of the world, as the Arabs call it, or Al-Qahira, the city that never sleeps. "20 million people move in a chaotic but perfectly organized urban mix among Ottoman minarets, Mamluk palaces, and modern skyscrapers. The scent of mint tea mixes with infinite honking, while the muezzin calls to prayer from atop the mosques. In the dusty streets, street vendors shout to sell their products, while children play among cars stopped in traffic, and in traditional bars called ahwa, men smoke shisha and play backgammon until late at night. In the bazaars, sharp-eyed merchants bargain in 5 different languages, selling everything, from colored spices to hand-painted papyrus. But the real treasure is the Egyptian Museum. In fact, here rests Tutankhamun, with his gold mask weighing 24 pounds or 11 kilograms, surrounded by 5,000 objects that tell 3,000 years of civilization. Every hall is a dive into time. And when the sun sets, the Nile turns pink, while the typical sailboats move silently toward infinity. Luxor, ruins of ancient Thebes, which was the capital of the empire when Egypt dominated the known world. Here between the 2 banks of the Nile, we find the Temple of Luxor, the complex of Karnak, and the Valley of the Kings. The Valley of the Kings opens like a natural amphitheater carved in the desert, where 64 pharaohs rest, including young Tutankhamun. Their tombs are authentic art galleries with walls painted with scenes from the Book of the Dead, stellar maps, and magical formulas to guide the king in the afterlife. tomb of Seti I, 394 feet or 120 meters long, descends into the bowels of the mountain, while Ramses VI rests under a ceiling that reproduces the sky goddess Nut. Every tomb is a journey into the deepest Egyptian imagination, where death is not an end, but transformation. Continuing on the other side of the Nile, the Temple of Karnak awaits like a giant. It is a religious complex as large as 10 cathedrals, built by 30 different pharaohs over the span of 2,000 years. The hypostyle hall, that is supported by columns, counts 134 columns as tall as 7-story buildings, decorated with hieroglyphs that still shine with original colors. Walking inside means becoming tiny ants. The Temple of Luxor, finally, is distinguished by its access avenue flanked by sphinxes and by its twin obelisks, one of which now stands in Paris in Place de la Concorde. It was connected to the nearby Temple of Karnak and served for great religious festivals, when thousands of people gathered to celebrate the gods. Alexandria. Here, Alexander the Great dreamed of a city that would unite East and West, and that dream became the most cultured metropolis of antiquity. Alexandria was home to the world's most famous library and the lighthouse standing 394 feet, or 120 meters tall, which was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Today, the city breathes nostalgia, with historic seaside cafes and decadent palaces that tell of when Greeks, Italians, French, and Armenians lived here, in an unrepeatable multicultural mosaic. The waterfront stretches for kilometers, while underwater lie the remains of the ancient lighthouse and Cleopatra's palace. Even today, marine archaeologists continue to pull up statues and columns from the seabed. Alexandria is therefore a city where the past literally continues to emerge from the water, reminding us that some greatness is never completely erased. Sharm el-Sheikh. Where the Sinai Desert meets the Red Sea, a paradise is born that the whole world has now heard about. Sharm el-Sheikh shines like a gem, set between mountains of golden sandstone and turquoise waters that hide one of the most spectacular coral reefs on the planet. Below the surface, in fact, a kaleidoscope of life explodes in every direction. Parrotfish in impossible colors, white-tip sharks that move silently, and turtles swimming among corals as big as cars. Nama Bay is the beating heart of the city, with luxury resorts, international restaurants, and duty-free shops that attract millions of tourists every year. The private beaches of the big hotels offer lounge chairs and umbrellas just meters from the famous diving sites, making Sharm the undisputed capital of Egyptian beach tourism. For those who also want to visit, in the historic center stands the Great Mosque, with its white minarets and golden dome that dominate the city's skyline, offering a touch of Islamic tradition in this modern tourist destination. White Desert and Black Desert. In the heart of the Egyptian Sahara, nature has sculpted two opposite and complementary works of art. The Black Desert stretches like a sea of volcanic rock, where dark dunes contrast with quartz crystals that shine like scattered diamonds. Here the mountains seem sprinkled with coal dust, while hot springs gush from the subsoil, creating unexpected green oases. A few hours walk away, however, the landscape transforms radically. The White Desert takes over and explodes in a symphony of impossible shapes. Gypsum mushrooms 33 feet or 10 meters tall, natural sphinxes and salt castles that the wind has shaped for millennia create a truly surreal open-air museum. During the hottest hours of the day, the sun transforms these natural sculptures into blazing furnaces, creating plays of light and shadow that continuously change the perception of the surrounding space. The colors of sunset tinge the gypsum with golden and rosy hues, while the echo of the wind is the only audible sound in this geological wonder. Abydos. In the silence of the desert, 99 miles or 160 kilometers north of Luxor, rise sacred place of ancient Egypt. Abydos preserves the temple of Seti I, a masterpiece of pharaonic art, where every millimeter of wall is covered with reliefs, hieroglyphs, and painted scenes, with incredible precision. Here is found the royal list of Abydos, that is 76 cartouches that list all the pharaohs from the unification of Egypt, a sort of family tree carved in stone from 1,500 years. But the real treasure is the Osirian, a mysterious structure buried in sand for centuries. They are enormous blocks of pink granite assembled without mortar, with a precision that defies all explanation. The underground chambers, flooded by a water table, reflect the stars painted on the ceilings. Here, according to legend, the god Osiris was buried, Lord of the Dead and Rebirth. In the past, every Egyptian pilgrim dreamed of being buried at Abydos to guarantee immortality. Giza Pyramid Complex. The morning sun strikes three stone giants that have defied time for over 4,500 years. The Great Pyramid of Cheops rises like a perfect geometric mountain, built with 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing as much as a modern car. Beside it, the pyramids of Khafre and Menkaure complete this sacred triangle, which once shone with bright white limestone, visible for kilometers away. Here, the desert meets the urban chaos of modern Cairo, creating a contrast that almost moves you. It's possible to walk among these colossi and feel the weight of history. They are not just monuments, but the only ones of the seven wonders of the ancient world still standing. Every stone tells of brilliant engineers who succeeded in the impossible, using only ramps, levers, and the strength of thousands of workers. And these three pyramids are just part of the wonders hidden in this area. In fact, just a few meters away, you can discover the other great Egyptian mystery. Sphinx of Giza. Half man, half lion, the Sphinx emerges from the golden sand like an enigma carved in living rock. Measuring 73 meters long and 20 meters high, or 240 feet long and 66 feet high, this mythological creature positions itself strategically next to the pyramids, completing the sacred complex of Giza with its mysterious presence. Its fixed gaze toward the east, where the sun rises every day, seems to dialogue eternally with the three colossi at its back. The face, probably that of Pharaoh Khafre, who is the same as the second pyramid, bears the signs of time and sandstorms. For centuries, this statue remained buried up to the neck, with only the head protruding from the desert like a forgotten dream. The missing nose, moreover, feeds legends. Some say it's Napoleon's fault, others blame religious fanatics. But the truth is simpler: natural erosion. Observing that ancient stone means letting yourself be enveloped by the world's most ancient mystery. What secrets does it hide beneath its powerful paws? Aswan. At Egypt's extreme south, where the Nile draws gentle curves near Sudan, the city of Aswan welcomes with a slow rhythm. The typical white boats float among verdant islets dotted with palm trees, while from Elephantine Island comes the sound of Nubian drums at sunset. Here the desert meets Black Africa, and you feel it in the darker faces, in the different music, in the sense of spices that arrive from Sudan. The Nubian people, who have ancient roots, welcome among the colored houses, that tell stories as ancient as the Nile itself. Reachable by boat from Aswan, in fact, the Nubian villages are an explosion of colors, with houses painted in blue, yellow, and pink, geometric decorations on the walls, women selling fragrant spices, and men offering sweet tea to visitors. You can still hear the Nubian language, while dromedaries rest in the shade in the streets, and souk stalls offer colorful fabrics and traditional jewelry. Saqqara. "19 miles or 30 kilometers south of Cairo, the desert hides the world's oldest funerary complex. Here, 4,700 years ago, the architect Imhotep literally invented the pyramid, building for Pharaoh Djoser humanity's first stone structure, the Step Pyramid. Saqqara is a true open-air history book, 5 miles or 8 kilometers long. Nobles, officials, and members of the royal family rest here in mastabas, which are bench-shaped tombs and decorated with scenes of daily life so detailed that they seem like photographs of ancient Egypt. They represent farmers plowing, fishermen casting nets, and women kneading bread. In this place, time has truly stopped, and every step takes you back 50 centuries when Egypt took its first steps toward immortality. Siwa Oasis. "342 miles or 550 kilometers from Cairo, in the heart of the Sahara, rises a true green miracle. We're talking about the Siwa Oasis, where 300,000 date palms create shade and coolness in the middle of infinite nothingness. This miracle is possible thanks to a fossil aquifer, which lies in the subsoil for thousands of years, feeding hundreds of natural springs that make this depression in the desert fertile. Here, time is marked by the prayers of the Siwi Berbers, and even if it may seem strange, the houses are made of mud and salt and climb on hills like nativity scenes. The hot springs instead, which gush from the subsoil, create natural pools where Alexander the Great himself bathed. Hurghada. Along 25 miles or 40 kilometers of pristine coast, Hurghada transforms the eastern desert into an aquatic playground. Here, the Red Sea offers its most beautiful spectacle, with crystal clear waters and coral reefs that have made this destination the capital of Egyptian beach tourism. The landscape, moreover, is a surreal contrast, with desert sand dunes that meet directly with the waters of the Red Sea, dotted only by modern resorts that break the desert immensity. In fact, here there are hundreds of all-inclusive resorts that face directly onto the sea, with private beaches, pools, and every imaginable comfort for a dream vacation. The nightlife of Marina Boulevard finally pulses until dawn, with international restaurants, beach bars, and nightclubs that attract vacationers from around the world. Abu Simbel. Two twin temples, carved into the red rock of Nubia, is so far from the world that they seem to belong to another planet. Ramses II, the most megalomaniac pharaoh in history, had 4 colossal statues of himself carved here, 66 feet or 20 meters tall, which have watched over the Nile for 3,200 years. Every detail tells of his glory, including the double royal cobra on his forehead, or the perfect folds of the pleated kilt, or the 10-foot or 3-meter-long feet that symbolically trample Egypt's enemies. Inside the temple, corridors and halls follow one another, among pillars decorated with battle scenes and colored reliefs that seem painted yesterday. The walls tell the victories of Ramses, especially the Battle of Kadesh, where the pharaoh boasted of having defeated thousands of enemies by himself. Beside the Great Temple rises the one dedicated to Queen Nefertari, where for the first time in Egyptian history, a woman appears as tall as the pharaoh. A true silent revolution carved in stone. Inside the temple, twice a year, that is on February 22nd and October 22nd, a ray of sun crosses 197 feet or 60 meters to perfectly illuminate 3 of the 4 statues in the Sancta Sanctorum. And do you know why only 3 are illuminated? Because the 4th represents Ptah, god of darkness and the underworld, and must remain forever in the dark according to Egyptian theology. But here there was also a modern miracle. In fact, in the 1960s, when the Aswan Dam threatened to submerge them, UNESCO cut the temples into 1,036 blocks and rebuilt them 213 feet or 65 meters higher, like a giant puzzle that involved 50 nations of the world. El Gouna. Along the Red Sea coast, El Gouna can be defined as a lagoon city, eco-sustainable resort, an urban experiment in the middle of the desert. Built on 18 artificial islands, connected by bridges and canals, it seems like a Venice of the desert, where instead of gondolas, there are colorful taxi boats. The architect who designed it in the 1990s created a micro-world where Nubian architecture mixes with contemporary design, and we therefore find white domes, cool courtyards, and bougainvillea that explode with color against walls painted ochre. Each island has its own identity. Some host luxury resorts with private villas on the water. Others are dedicated to golf and wellness centers, while the central islands teem with restaurants, bars, and boutiques that attract a sophisticated international clientele. The Guna Conference Center finally, with its futuristic architectural lines that contrast with the surrounding desert environment, has become a reference point for international events and a symbol of the visionary ambition of this artificial city. Dahshur. "25 miles or 40 kilometers from Cairo, two pyramids tell the story of Egyptian architectural evolution. Snefru's bent pyramid amazes with its unique shape. In fact, it's built with an inclination of 54 degrees, but at half height the angle suddenly changes to 43 degrees. A calculation error by the architects? A structural collapse? The mystery remains unsolved, but the result is an unmistakable silhouette that breaks the horizon. Beside it, the red pyramid marks triumph instead. The first true pyramid in history. Perfect in its geometry and mother of all the pyramids that would follow. Dahshur represents the experimental laboratory of pyramid builders who here failed, here triumphed, and here the legend was born. Marsa Alam. On the Red Sea coast, where the eastern desert touches crystal clear water, Marsa Alam guards one of Egypt's best-kept secrets. Here, sandy beaches alternate with protected bays, where sea turtles nest undisturbed. Elphinstone Reef emerges from the depths with coral walls that plunge into the blue abyss, inhabited by gray sharks, giant manta rays, and schools of barracuda. But the real treasure is Marsa Mubarak, a turquoise lagoon where dugongs graze peacefully on algae meadows on the sandy bottom. These marine mammals, cousins of manatees, can reach 10 feet or 3 meters in length and live up to 70 years. Seeing them emerge to breathe or simply swimming on the surface is an experience that touches the soul. The area remains wild and underdeveloped, with eco-sustainable resorts that protect this habitat. Kom Ombo Temple. On On the river, caressed by the waves of the Nile, rises a temple unique in the world. Double, symmetrical, and perfect. Kom-Ombo is divided exactly in half between two divinities. Sobek, the crocodile god with terrible jaws, and Horus, the divine falcon. Two entrances, two sancta sanctorum, two of everything. Even the ancient Egyptians didn't want to risk offending either of the two. The walls overflow with medical scenes, with surgical instruments, cesarean sections, and dental cures that demonstrate how advanced Egyptian medicine was. Next to the temple, the Crocodile Museum preserves perfectly preserved mummies of these sacred reptiles, where once pilgrims consulted oracles. And if the animal accepted the offered food, the answer was positive. Dahab. In the heart of Sinai, where mountains of red sandstone reflect in cobalt-colored waters, Dahab preserves the soul of a Bedouin village that has embraced the world. The name means gold in Arabic, and here by gold we mean the sunsets that set the mountains on fire while camels walk on the beach. Asala, which is the old part, still smells of incense, and Bedouin tea, and there are improvised cafes where people smoke shisha. The golden sand beaches stretch for kilometers, perfect for windsurfing and kite surfing thanks to constant winds that blow all year. But Dahab also hides the Blue Hole, an underwater chasm 427 feet or 130 meters deep that attracts divers from around the world. This perfectly circular crater is connected to the open sea by a tunnel at 180 feet or 55 meters depth. Crossing it means swimming in a blue cathedral where light filters from above, illuminating the black coral walls. In the hinterland, finally, the Colored Canyon offers spectacular trekking among sandstone walls in shades of red, yellow, and purple. Kalabsha Temple. Imagine a temple that has traveled twice in history. First to escape the waters of Lake Nasser, then to continue to amaze. Kalabsha, dedicated to the Nubian god Mandalise, now rises on an artificial island near the Aswan Dam, saved and moved here by UNESCO in the 1960s. Its stones mix the Egypt of the pharaohs with Nubian traditions. In fact, here, Augustus Caesar had his name carved, next to hieroglyphs that celebrated divinities with unpronounceable names. The reliefs show the pharaoh offering gifts to a god with human body and falcon head, while dark-skinned Nubian priests attend the ceremonies. The temple columns still preserve the original colors after 2,000 years, and Roman imperial cartouches mix with sacred Nubian symbols. Every stone is therefore a piece of the puzzle that unites two worlds, the Egypt that everyone knows and the Nubia that few have discovered. Edfu. Between Luxor and Aswan, along the western bank of the Nile, rises the best-preserved temple of all Egypt. Dedicated to Horus, the falcon god with spread wings, the temple remained buried under 39 feet or 12 meters of sand and debris for centuries, preserving intact colors and reliefs. The majestic pylons, 118 feet or 36 meters high, narrate the eternal battle between Horus and Seth, that is, between light and darkness and order and chaos. In the Sancta Sanctorum, the sacred boat of black granite still awaits the god who will never return, while the walls ooze secrets, including recipes for sacred perfumes, magical formulas, and astronomical calendars that mark the rhythms of religious life. Walking among these columns, you can still perceive the echo of dozens of celebrations that were held here millennia ago. Philae Temple. On an island floating in the Nile, the Temple of Philae, dedicated to the goddess Isis, defies the impossible. This sanctuary, dedicated precisely to the goddess of magic and motherhood, lived a second birth in the 1970s, when it was dismantled stone by stone from the island of Philae, now submerged and rebuilt on the island of Agilkia. The papyriform columns reflect in the water, while the pylons tell the story of Isis who brought Osiris back to life. The capitals shaped like lotus flowers seem to bloom, and the echo of ancient ritual chants still seems to resonate among these walls. Here, the last hieroglyph in history was carved in 394 AD, when the ancient world was about to give way to Christianity. Colossi of Memnon. Two stone giants sit in silence for 3,400 years, watching the sun rise every day over the plain of Luxor. 59 feet or 18 meters tall, these faceless guardians once watched over the funerary temple of Amenhotep III, the pharaoh who ruled Egypt when it was the superpower of the ancient world.